Dante Salvator was at his coldest on the 7th anniversary of his wedding, until he looked at her across a table full of men who feared him. His offer had once been simple: 7 years of his name, his protection, and his untouched bed. 7 years, 1 ring, absolute safety. What he wanted was nothing she did not freely give. What he promised was that no one in his world would ever lay a hand on her alive. Serafina Bellini Salvator had made rules of her own. She would wear his ring, keep her distance, build a life in the quiet spaces he left her, and never ask why a man capable of bloodshed had drawn the one line no one else believed he had. But by the end of that night, rules would split open. Because there were whispers in the family, a traitor in the walls, a ledger buried under the dead, and a wife who still did the one thing that ruined him most. She stepped toward the blood. And before dawn, the most feared man in New York would be on his knees, asking his untouched wife to let him become her husband. Chapter 1, The Handkerchief. The first sound I heard that night was the click. Soft, metallic, precise. Dante's silver lighter always sounded like that, as if even fire answered to him quietly. The dining room at Villa Salvator went still before he entered. It was one of the things that never failed to unsettle me after 7 years in his name. 20 men could be breathing in a room, shifting, clearing throats, pretending they were not armed under their jackets. Then Dante would reach the door. His lighter would click once against his thumb, and silence would fold over the room like a lid. I sat halfway down the long walnut table in a dress Lucia had insisted was wife enough for an anniversary dinner I had never asked for. Deep green silk, high throat, long sleeves. My wedding ring felt heavier tonight than gold should. Paolo Rixai stood near the sideboard, looking mournfully at a tray of arancini as if he had lost a relative there. "Don't," Myrla warned him from the doorway. Paolo put a hand over his heart. "A man cannot even grieve in this house." "You are not grieving," Myrla said. "You are calculating breadcrumbs." He sighed toward heaven. "This is persecution." I almost smiled, and then Dante walked in. He wore black as usual, not fashionable black, not performative black. Dante dressed the way a threat might dress if it learned manners. His coat was still on. That meant he had come straight from outside, from business, from whatever had delayed him, almost an hour past the time written on the embossed invitations. No one in this family would have dared ignore. There was blood at the corner of his mouth. Not much, just a dark line against the hard cut of his lower lip. No one looked at it, not directly. That was another rule of his world. Men saw exactly what he allowed them to see and pretended the rest had always belonged there. My pulse stumbled once. Dante's gaze found me, then moved past me to the others. He took the head of the table without sitting. "Eat," he said. No one moved, his eyes lifted. That was not a difficult instruction. Chairs scraped, glasses shifted. Conversation tried and failed to start. I watched the blood at his mouth and knew, with the kind of certainty that arrived before thought, that if I let him stand there wearing it, every man in this room would go home and tell himself a story about what he had done before dinner. They would enjoy it. Fear made men sentimental. I rose before I had decided to. Lucia made a small sound under her breath. Paolo froze with an olive halfway to his plate. Dante did not move at all. I crossed the room with my napkin in one hand and my grandmother's linen handkerchief in the other. I had carried it out of habit for years. White cloth, hand-stitched edge, one small embroidered S in the corner. When I stopped in front of him, the room stopped with me. "Serafina," Lucia whispered, a warning. Dante looked down at me the way he looked at doors he had not yet decided whether to open. I lifted the handkerchief. His voice came low. "What are you doing? You're bleeding on my anniversary dinner." Something changed at one corner of Paolo's mouth. Terror and admiration, probably in equal measure. Dante's eyes darkened, not with anger, with that worse thing, attention. "Your dinner," he repeated. "Our dinner," I said, though my heart had begun to pound so hard I could feel it in my wrists. "Tilt your chin," a lesser man would have laughed. A crueler man would have enjoyed refusing. Dante bent his head. I touched the linen to his lip. Warmth. A faint drag of stubble against my knuckles. The sharp, clean scent of his cologne layered over cold air and night rain and something metallic underneath. Blood, probably. Gun oil, maybe him. I did not flinch. That was the part that always undid him, though I did not understand it then, not fully. Other people recoiled from what Dante was. They admired him from a distance or feared him properly. I stepped close enough to see the human damage and treated it like a fact instead of a legend. His hand flexed once at his side. "Little Saint," he said softly. The nickname landed the way it always had the first time he used it on our wedding day. Not tender, not kind, possessive in the way a lock was possessive. As if he had looked at my white gloves and church veil and decided innocence was a thing that might yet survive in his house if he guarded it hard enough. I lowered the handkerchief. The room was silent enough for everyone to hear Dante breathe. Then he took the cloth from my hand with 2 fingers, folded it once, and slipped it into his breast pocket like something worth keeping. "Sit down," he said. I should have. Instead I asked, "Who was it this time?" A few men stopped chewing. Dante's gaze stayed on my face. "A man who forgot his place. That happens often around anniversaries, more often around weakness." The word moved through the room like a knife laid flat on skin. He sat at last. Only then did everyone else seem to remember how to use their bodies. I returned to my chair. My legs felt less reliable than I would have liked. Across the table, Matteo Vitelli smiled into his wineglass. Matteo had been part of Dante's life longer than I had. Foster brother, some said. Shadow, others said. He was beautiful in a way that made women careless and men overly certain they could charm him back. I had never liked his eyes. They looked too amused when nobody had said anything funny. "To 7 years," Matteo said, raising his glass. "A rare marriage." The room answered him in murmurs. Dante did not drink. I did because my mouth had gone dry. Matteo leaned back. "The city talks, you know," Paolo muttered. "The city should get a hobby," and Meyerla stepped on his shoe. Matteo smiled wider. "It wonders how a wife stays untouched for 7 years. Every nerve in my body turned to glass. No one looked at me, which was worse than if they had. Dante set down his fork with exquisite care. "And you thought this table was the place to repeat gossip. I thought family was the place to settle uncertainty." Matteo's tone remained light. "An heir would quiet many concerns." I looked at my plate. The fish had gone cold. My face felt hot anyway. Dante said nothing for a beat too long. "Then my marriage is not a council matter. Everything becomes a council matter when bloodlines are involved." That did it. Not anger, not shouting, just the slightest shift in the room. Men straightened. Meyerla quietly removed the crystal decanter nearest Matteo's hand, as if she had seen breakage coming. Dante's lighter clicked once under the table. "I buried 1 man tonight," he said. "Do not make me regret stopping at 1. Matteo inclined his head. "Of course." But he smiled at me when he said it. I understood then that whatever this dinner had been meant to celebrate, it had ended. After dessert went untouched and the men filed out with their careful faces, Dante asked me to stay. The staff disappeared. Even Lucia left after one long look at me that felt like a prayer she no longer trusted. I stood at my chair. Dante remained seated at the head of the table, one hand over the silver lighter, thumb resting against the lid. "You embarrassed him," I said. "Matteo embarrasses himself regularly. That's not what I meant. I know." The chandeliers hummed softly above us. Somewhere in the house, a door closed with the deep-throated weight of old money and better locks. "You should have let me answer him," I said. "By discussing my bed in front of men who would enjoy imagining it," my throat tightened. "I am not a child." His eyes lifted to mine, very dark, very steady. "No. You are my wife." Something dangerous moved beneath the words. Not desire exactly. Not yet. History, ownership in law, distance in practice. 7 years of tension packed tight enough to bruise. Then he stood. Every instinct I had sharpened over the years told me to step back. I did not. That, too, was one of my mistakes where Dante Salvator was concerned. I had stopped treating him like something that might suddenly strike. He came around the table and stopped close enough that I could feel the cold he had brought in from outside. "There will be changes," he said. "What kind of changes? You will leave the hotel kitchen." My chest went hard. "No, you will move back to the East Wing tonight. I already live here 3 nights a week. You will live here every night. Dante, armed escort, no unapproved staff, no city walks. No bakery deliveries without Paolo. You cannot lock me up because Matteo made a disgusting comment over sea bass." His jaw shifted once. "I can do exactly what keeps you alive." I should have lowered my eyes. I should have let the argument end where it always ended, with his will outlasting mine. Instead, I said, "And if what keeps me alive is the thing that finally kills whatever is left of me." For the first time that night, he looked almost humanly tired. His hand lifted, not to touch me. He had not touched me in 7 years, not beyond the accidental brush of fingers passing keys or documents. Even now, his palm stopped beside my face, heat hovering in the air between us like an unanswered question. Then he dropped it. "Pack a bag," he said. "Dante, the door to your old rooms will be locked by midnight." His lighter clicked softly as he turned away. One door closed, another vanished. Chapter 2. The locked wing. I had forgotten how loud marble floors could be at 3 in the morning. Every step I took down the East Wing sounded borrowed, as if I were walking through someone else's life while mine sat cooling behind me in the hotel kitchen. Under clean steel counters and trays of unfinished pastry cream, Lucia supervised the unpacking with military calm. She had run Villa Salvator longer than I had been married, which meant longer than I had been a woman in anyone's eyes, including my own. "The blue dresses go in this wardrobe," she said to the maids. "I can unpack myself." "Yes," Lucia replied, "and the Pope can boil eggs, but we are not asking him to." The girls tried not to smile. I should have laughed. Usually Lucia's dry cruelty steadied me. Tonight I only stared at the connecting door between my sitting room and Dante's private suite. It had always been there. It had also always been locked, not metaphorically, not romantically. A real brass key, a real heavy mechanism built into a wall thick enough to survive a siege. 7 years of marriage, and that door had never opened from his side. Lucia dismissed the maids, then came to stand beside me. She smelled like starch and lavender water and the cigarettes she pretended not to smoke. "Do not stand there inventing tragedies," she said. "I am not inventing them. He imports them." One corner of her mouth moved. "That is fair." I looked at the door. "Do you know what changed?" "Yes." I turned. Lucia folded one of my sweaters with careful, square hands. "I will tell you 2 things. First, when men like Matteo ask questions in public, they already believe they know the answer. Second, when Dante moves you closer, it is because he has run out of safer distances. That is not comforting. It was not meant to be." She left me with that, and the sound of the lock on the outer hallway door settling into place. After midnight. By morning, I had slept perhaps an hour. I put on plain cream trousers and one of my work blouses out of stubbornness more than hope. If Dante intended to turn me into an ornamental prisoner, he would have to do it while I was carrying a recipe notebook and smelling faintly of vanilla bean. Paolo waited by the car downstairs, sunglasses on despite the rain. "You look," he said, inspecting me solemnly, "like a woman on her way to commit either treason or excellent meal fi. Good morning to you too." He opened the rear door for me and leaned in. "Before we leave, I need you to know something important." I paused halfway inside. "What? If you baked anything last night and left it unattended, I did not eat it. Paolo." He placed a hand over his chest. "I am on a low-carb journey." From the front steps, Myrla called. "His journey lasts until he smells butter." Paolo closed his eyes as if wounded. "Why does the woman I love humiliate me before coffee?" Myrla, carrying a crate of produce, did not break stride. "Because God made me strong." I laughed before I could stop myself. That was Paolo's gift. He made rooms feel survivable. The hotel kitchen greeted me with familiar heat, copper pans, and the kind of organized noise that had saved me many times without anyone noticing. Sugar obeyed rules. Butter rewarded patience. Dough rose or failed for reasons I could learn. There was mercy in that. I tied on my apron and walked straight into Dante. He stood just inside the office doorway, coat still on, as if he had entered and transformed the entire kitchen atmosphere by refusing to belong to it. Chefs who barked at one another 5 seconds earlier now moved with reverent silence. His gaze dropped to the apron strings at my waist, then returned to my face. "You came anyway," he said. "I have a production schedule. You had an instruction. I know." It was ridiculous how much could happen in the space between one sentence and the next when he was involved. His stillness did things to air, bent it, tightened it. Paolo, traitor to womanhood, slipped away muttering something about inventory. I folded my arms. "If this is where you tell me my work is a hobby, choose your words carefully." Dante stepped closer to the stainless counter between us. "This is where I tell you the kitchen is compromised." The word landed wrong. My spine straightened. "What does that mean?" "It means one of the pastry porters was paid to copy delivery schedules. It means Mateo's people knew what door you used on Thursdays. It means the coffee cart outside received a second delivery this morning from a company that does not exist." Cold moved under my skin. Why wasn't I told? Because I am telling you now, that is not an answer. It is the only one that matters. He looked over my shoulder at the trays cooling on the rack, pistachio shells, citrus sponge, sugar domes I had blown by hand into delicate amber half-spheres. His expression changed by a fraction. Curiosity, perhaps. Dante did not often allow himself that. "You made these?" he asked. "Yes." He lifted one dome carefully between thumb and forefinger. "They look breakable." "They are, but they held." I met his eyes. "Only if the temperature stays steady." Something sharper than conversation passed between us. He set the sugar back down as if it might mean more than dessert if handled incorrectly. "I'm assigning Gianni to your kitchen entrance," he said. "I don't need a bodyguard to temper chocolate. You need one to survive walking to the loading bay." I hated that he could say it so calmly. Like weather, like fact. Before I could answer, a young Camille hurried past with a tray and clipped my shoulder. I lost my balance on a patch of water near the sink. Dante's hand caught my waist. Everything in me stopped. Not the room. The room kept moving. Pans clanged. Someone called for cream. The exhaust fans roared overhead. But inside my skin, there was only the shape of his hand through linen, and the impossible knowledge that Dante Salvator was touching me on purpose for the first time in 7 years. His grip was firm, brief, devastatingly sure. He steadied me, then let go so fast it might have been pain instead of restraint. I looked at him. He looked at the wet floor, then at the cook responsible, who turned white on sight. "Dry it," Dante said. The cook nearly fell over himself obeying. My waist burned where his fingers had been. "Why now?" I asked quietly. His gaze came back to mine. "Because I should have done it sooner." The answer cracked through me in a place I had not guarded properly. A timer shrilled. Someone swore in Italian. Life resumed. Dante stepped back. Distance returned like punishment. He said, "By tonight your equipment will be moved to the villa kitchen." "No. Yes. You do not get to uproot the only part of my life that was mine." His jaw tightened. "You think I don't know that? Then stop taking it." For a beat I thought he might say something reckless, something true. His eyes dropped to my mouth, then lifted again, sealed over. First restraint. When he spoke, the words were cool enough to frost glass. "You can hate me in safer rooms." He turned and left. The kitchen breathed again after he was gone. Paolo reappeared from nowhere, carrying a clipboard and the expression of a man returning from battle. I would like it entered into the official family record that I witnessed chemistry so severe it nearly curdled the custard. "Paolo," he lowered his voice. "For what it's worth, Signora, when the boss looks like that, people usually disappear, not ovens. That is not reassuring. It is, actually." Ovens mean he plans for you to stay alive. I stared at the sugar domes cooling on the rack. Clear, fragile, holding only because conditions were exact. By evening, my mixers, molds, and marble slab had been relocated to the villa. By night, the hallway lock clicked shut again. And from the other side of the connecting door, I heard Dante's lighter once. Only once. Chapter 3. Sugar glass. The villa kitchen was bigger than my apartment had been before the marriage, brighter than the hotel kitchen in the mornings, and lonelier than either. Lucia had given me the south counters, the old copper sugar pot, and a look that said I should be grateful to have one even that much. Outside the windows, the formal garden glittered with rain. Inside, fresh basil hung from hooks beside antique molds shaped like saints, shells, and pomegranates. I chose sugar because it demanded attention. By noon, I had blown 6 amber spheres, piped bitter chocolate mousse into thin shells, layered rose cream beneath, and finished each one with a caramel top, so delicate it would shatter under the edge of a spoon. A dessert that looked harder than it was, a dessert that would not survive rough hands. Paolo leaned over the counter and whistled low. This is an attack. It's dessert. It is emotional sabotage in plated form. I kept my eyes on the sugar. You wanted to taste test. I always want a taste test. It is my burden. Meyerla appeared behind him and slapped the back of his head with a dish towel. Your burden is cholesterol. He rubbed his skull. One day you will soften. One day you will stop stealing cannoli and I will die of the shock. He sighed like a tragic hero in a cheap opera. She wounds because she cannot admit love. I laughed, and Gianni Russo came in carrying 3 crates of produce as if they weighed nothing. Gianni had run Salvator security for almost a decade and wore gentleness badly, like a borrowed coat over a knife. He was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, never louder than necessary. When Dante trusted someone near me, I paid attention. What's the verdict? He asked Paolo. Paolo straightened. I taste for security concerns only. Meaning if there is poison, I will die a patriot. Meyerla rolled her eyes so hard it should have injured her. I plated one of the desserts and set it in front of Gianni instead. Paolo pressed a hand to his chest. Favoritism, in front of witnesses. Gianni took a spoonful, his brows lifted. Sweet top. Bitter base. Rose in the middle, I said. He glanced at me. That on purpose, I shrugged. I like contrast. Paolo leaned in, lowering his voice theatrically. What is it called? I looked at the caramel shell, catching the kitchen light like a polished lie. The saint's glass. Paolo blinked. That is either beautiful or mildly threatening. It's both, Gianni said, and I hated how seen I felt for a second. The smile vanished from the room when Dante entered. His lighter clicked. Paolo instinctively moved a half step away from the tray. Dante's gaze passed over the assembled staff, then landed on the plated dessert in Gianni's hand. What is that? Paolo answered before anyone else could. A masterpiece, boss, also apparently a psychological event. Dante ignored him. Serafina, it's new. I can see that. There was a beat where no one breathed normally. Then, to my horror, he picked up Gianni's spoon and cut through the caramel top. The shell cracked with a clean, fragile sound that seemed too loud in the kitchen. He took a bite. His expression did not change. That was typical. Paolo leaned toward me and whispered, If he hates it, I never met you. Dante swallowed, looked at the dessert again. What's in the middle? He asked. Rose cream. The bottom, dark chocolate with orange zest. And the top, burnt sugar. His eyes lifted to mine. Because it looks strong and breaks easily, I did not answer. Not because he was wrong, because he was too close. Second almost. Gianni cleared his throat and set down the crates. The doc call came in. Pier 12. Dante's focus shifted instantly, the way it always did when business entered a room. It was frightening how cleanly he could turn from man to weapon. Losses. 1 dead. 2 missing. Paolo muttered a prayer in Italian that ended with, and if possible, spare me from paperwork. Dante said, office, now. They began to move. Dante stopped in the doorway and looked back at me. Lock this kitchen after service. It's a kitchen, not a bunker. Today it's both. He left with Gianni and Paolo. I told myself the tightness in my chest was irritation. It was not only irritation. An hour later, I found the ledger page in a produce box. At first I thought it was wrapping paper. Cheap, folded, stained at the corner with oil. Then I saw the handwriting. My father's. The world narrowed. Carlo Bellini had taught me numbers before recipes, patience before grief. He had kept the Salvator books for 20 years and died for something nobody had ever fully explained to me. Dante told me only that my father had died loyal and that his enemies would come for whatever they believed Carlo had hidden. 2 days later, Dante had married me in a chapel with 6 witnesses and a priest who looked scared. I unfolded the page with shaking fingers. Columns, transfers, shipping codes. One recurring mark in the margin beside 5 separate entries. M.V. Matteo Vitelli. My mouth went dry. I slid the page under my recipe notebook just as Lucia came in. She took one look at my face. What happened? Nothing. That answer means something happened. I glanced toward the office wing. If I wanted to know whether old produce boxes ever got reused from the accounting archive, who would I ask? Lucia went still in a way that made her age show for the first time. Not Dante, she said. Why? Because if he has hidden something from you for 7 years, he believes he had reason. And if I decide I want the reason, her expression sharpened with something like pity, then you should prepare to lose the version of your marriage that lets you sleep. She left before I could ask anything else. That evening, I stood outside Dante's office with the ledger page folded in my pocket and heard voices inside. Matteo first, smooth as polished glass. She cannot stay sheltered forever. Dante, watch me. A pause, then Matteo again. You married her to protect an asset. Don't make the mistake of mistaking habit for feeling. I should have walked away. Instead, I stayed long enough to hear Dante say, very quietly, You do not know the first thing about my mistakes. I backed off the corridor before anyone opened the door. Later, in the privacy of my rooms, I unfolded the page again. MV, I knew one fast truth already. My father had hidden something. My husband had known more than he told me. And somewhere in this house, a man who smiled too easily had his initials written in the margins of the dead. From the other side of the connecting door, Dante's lighter clicked once. He was awake. So was I Dante. He had watched her all afternoon through the kitchen glass and hated himself for the relief it brought. The handkerchief in his pocket still held the faint trace of rose soap from her skin. 7 years and she still did it, stepped toward blood, toward him. If Matteo had seen the ledger page missing from the archive, the timetable had changed. And the one thing Dante had sworn not to do, pull Serafina deeper into his darkness, was now the only way to keep her alive. Chapter 4, the chapel steps. The first time Dante told me the truth, he did it in the chapel, not the family chapel where we were married. This one sat behind the villa garden, small and old and mostly unused, except by Lucia on Sundays and Paolo when he needed divine help resisting pastry. Rain worked against the stained glass windows. Thunder moved somewhere above the grounds like furniture, dragged across heaven. I found Dante there after midnight because I could not sleep, and because the ledger page in my robe pocket felt like a live thing against my ribs. He stood near the front pews with his jacket off, white shirt sleeves rolled to the forearms, one hand braced against the back of a bench. A votive candle burned beside him. He did not turn when I came in. You walk very softly for a woman who wants answers, he said. You hear too much for a man who never rests. He looked at the altar instead of me. What did you find? I stopped moving. You knew, I said. I guessed. I took the folded page from my pocket and held it up. My father's handwriting, Matteo's initials. At that, Dante turned. His face gave away almost nothing, but after 7 years I had learned where to look. Not his mouth, never his mouth. The truth lived in the stillness around his eyes. Come here, he said. I should have refused. I walked to the first pew instead and remained standing, close enough to speak quietly, not close enough to forget myself. Tell me, I said. Rain struck the windows in sharp bursts. The air smelled like wax and stone. Dante took the page from my hand, glanced at it once, and folded it exactly along the old crease. Your father found money missing from the orphanage fund. The Salvator orphanage, he nodded. I stared at him. Dante and Matteo had both grown up in St. Bartholomew's home before Don Salvator took them in. Dante almost never spoke of it. When he did, his voice turned so flat it frightened me. Missing for years? I asked. Yes, and Matteo likely rooted some of it through shell companies. The word likely sat wrong. You're not sure? No, then why hide this from me? A muscle moved in his jaw. Because the night your father died, he gave me enough names to know the next move would be against you. The chapel seemed to narrow around us. My father spoke to you? He was bleeding out in the back of my car. I closed my eyes. For 1 second, just one, I nearly lost my footing. When I opened them again, Dante had not moved closer. That absurdly hurt. He told me where the copies were, Dante said. He told me who would come looking. He told me if I wanted you alive, my name had to reach you before theirs did. So you married me. Yes. Why marriage? Because protection has loopholes. Wife does not. The words should have felt cold. They did not. They felt like iron heated past its visible point. I laughed once without humor. That is the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, which I resent enormously. To my shock, the corner of his mouth almost moved. Almost. Third almost. Then thunder cracked directly overhead and the chapel lights went out. I startled, not gracefully. Dante crossed the distance in one step and caught my elbow before I slipped on the stone. Darkness folded around us. Candle light from the altar trembled against his face. His hand stayed on my arm, warm, bare, unmistakable. The storm raged at the windows. Easy, he said. I could hear my own breathing. Could hear his, slower, deeper. The contact between us changed shape by the second, becoming less accidental, more unbearable. You promised, I whispered before I could stop myself. His hand tightened once. I promised I wouldn't take what wasn't freely mine. That is not the same thing as never touching me. In the flickering light, his expression turned harsh with self-control. For me, it is. I did not know what to do with that. I did not know what part of me warmed and what part of me wanted to run. Outside, a car horn sounded twice, sharp, urgent. Dante released me immediately and looked toward the door. A second later, Paolo burst in, soaked to the bone and panting. Good news, he said. I am alive. Bad news, somebody shot at the east gate. All softness vanished from the room. Where? Dante asked. Stone pillar by the intercom. Gianni says it was distance work. Professional. Paolo looked at me, then back to Dante. Also, Myrla says if I die before proposing, she will kill me herself. Even in the middle of fear, a helpless sound escaped me. Paolo spread his hands. I contain multitudes. Dante was already moving. Get her inside the panic room. I can walk myself. Not tonight. I followed them through the stormlit corridor while armed men converged from different wings. The house changed when danger touched it. Footsteps sharpened. Voices lowered. The very walls seemed to listen. At the hidden door behind the library shelves, Gianni met us, rein on his shoulders and a rifle slung across his chest. All clear inside, he said. Then to me, softer, sorry, Signora. For what? For this being your life now. The honesty of it struck harder than the attack. Inside the panic room, Paolo handed me a blanket and muttered, If anyone needs me, I'll be in the corner pretending carbohydrates could have prevented this. Dante ignored him. He turned to me instead. There's another part you should know. I looked up. The reason I never touched you. The room went silent in a different way. My heart began to hammer again. Dante's eyes held mine. You were 18, grieving, surrounded by men who would have treated marriage as access. I would not be one of them. I could not answer. He continued, voice lower. Then time passed, and the line got harder, not easier. Why? For a second I thought he would not say it. Then, because you stopped being a duty. Something in me broke open so quietly I nearly missed it. Gianni's radio crackled. Mateo's voice came through faintly from the outer hall, offering more guards, more concern, more smiles. Dante took the radio from Gianni without looking away from me. "Keep Mateo out of this wing," he said. And for the first time, I understood that the safest thing in his world might also be the most dangerous to my heart. Chapter 5. Bitter almond. The next morning, I tried to make pate a chew and nearly salted the sugar twice. Lucia watched me from the breakfast table in the villa kitchen with the expression of a woman witnessing a minor natural disaster. "You are stirring rage into the custard," she said. "I am stirring nothing. Exactly, it is separated." I looked down. She was right. Outside, men patrolled the garden paths in dark coats under a pale, brittle sky. After the shot at the gate, nothing in the house sounded ordinary anymore. Every closing door seemed strategic. Every lowered voice seemed like an arrangement I was too female and too wife to be told. Dante had left before dawn for the docks. He had also left a bodyguard outside my kitchen. Gianni, thankfully. If Mateo's suggestion of additional security became reality, I would have walked into the ocean. Gianni leaned in through the doorway around noon. "You should eat. I'm working. You've remade the same glaze 4 times. It's a sensitive glaze. It's a nervous baker." I sighed and set down the whisk. "Did Dante ask you to say that?" "No." "Dante rarely asks. He looks. People reorganize themselves." That was true enough to be almost funny. I made espresso for both of us. He took his black. I added too much sugar and stared out the window at the clipped hedges shining after rain. "Do you trust Mateo?" I asked. Gianni did not answer at once. That told me more than words would have. "Not with things that bleed," he said finally. "And the rest?" He rolled the hot cup between his hands. "The rest is harder." Before I could push further, Paolo appeared carrying flowers and a face full of intent. "These," he announced, "are not for you. They're in my kitchen. Yes, but emotionally they belong to Myrla." The bouquet was enormous and objectively offensive, red roses, white peonies. Branches of eucalyptus, thrust in with the confidence of a man who had never arranged anything in his life. "It looks like a florist lost a bet," I said. Paolo pointed at me. "Exactly the spirit I need." "Tell her it says, 'Though your tongue is sharp, your soul is merciful.'" "It says that?" "It says whatever works," Gianni muttered. "This is why men get shot." Paolo clutched the bouquet to his chest. "Love is risk." "Your risk," Myrla said from behind him, "is immediate." She took the flowers anyway. For one suspended second, Paolo looked so hopeful that my chest hurt. Then Myrla sniffed. "Too many roses. You are trying too hard." Paolo deflated. "Madonna preserve me." She carried the bouquet out with her chin high and a smile she was trying not to show. When Paolo saw it, tiny and quick and entirely real, he grinned like a fool. That warmth stayed in the kitchen after they left. It made what happened next feel even colder. I was prepping almond sponge when the smell hit me. Bitter. Wrong. Not the sweetness of amaretto. Not toasted almond flour. Something thin and metallic underneath. My father used to say a kitchen taught you truth by fractions. Too much heat. One stale nut. The sour edge before cream turned. Once you knew how to smell danger, it became difficult not to notice it everywhere. I lifted the small silver pot of syrup someone had left by my station and brought it closer. Bitter almond. Not enough to announce itself to everyone, enough to matter. "Gianni," I said quietly. He was beside me at once. "Don't touch this." His face changed. "What is it?" "I'm not sure." I looked at the pot again. "But it shouldn't smell like this." He called for Dante's house doctor and locked down the kitchen in under 30 seconds. By the time Dante arrived, the room had gone from culinary workspace to crime scene. Men in dark suits, gloves, too much silence. The syrup pot sat in the middle of the marble counter like an accusation. Dante took in the scene, then me. "What happened?" "I found it before service." "You tasted it." "No." His shoulders lowered by 1 hard inch. Relief, brief, furious relief. The doctor finished his test and straightened. Cyanogenic compound. Crude, but enough. I felt suddenly cold all the way through. Someone had meant to poison the dessert table at Dante's meeting that evening, or me before I reached the table. Dante looked at the pot, then at the prep list. Who had access? Too many people, too many names, too many places weakness could hide. I said, the porter yesterday, the replacement today. One of the pantry boys, anyone with 10 seconds and a bad soul. Gianni added, I've got cameras being pulled now. Dante's gaze returned to me. How did you know? It was ridiculous that this should embarrass me in the middle of attempted murder, but it did. My father trained my nose before my hands, I said. He said numbers lie more elegantly than food, but both leave traces if you care enough to notice. Something unreadable moved through Dante's expression. Pride, maybe. Pain. I didn't expect that, he said. I know. He stepped closer to the counter, too close for easy breathing. My father taught me because he believed careful women survived longer, I said. I suppose he was right and very inconvenient about it. Dante's hand flattened on the marble beside mine. Not touching, almost. I should have told you more sooner, he said. That is the closest thing to an apology I've ever heard from you. It is all you're getting. I looked up at him. His eyes dropped again to my mouth, stayed there 1 second too long. Then he stepped back and the air turned usable. Fourth almost. That evening Gianni found the pantry boy bound and frightened in a delivery van. Paid, threatened, told only to switch pots. Betrayal suspected, still faceless. After the kitchen cleared, I found Dante alone in the dark office, my father's ledger page on his desk. You kept copies, I said. Yes, you knew I could help. Yes, then why didn't you let me? He was quiet for so long I thought he would refuse. Then, because every time you prove you belong in this world, I lose a reason to keep you out of it. It was the most honest thing he had ever given me. I should have been angry. Instead, I stood in his doorway, heart aching with something far more dangerous than fear. Chapter 6. The night he begged war arrived on a Wednesday with black SUVs, broken glass, and the smell of wet gunpowder. We were leaving a warehouse in Red Hook after Dante insisted I identify one of my father's cipher marks on a shipment manifest. The plan had been simple. 10 minutes inside, Gianni at my shoulder. Paolo complaining softly about the neighborhood's lack of decent espresso. Dante in front, coat open, danger arranged around him like weather. Then the first shot took the side mirror off the lead car. Gianni shoved me down behind a concrete barrier so hard my knees scraped raw through my trousers. Men shouted. Tires screamed. Somewhere metal rang against metal in a shower of sparks. Stay down, Gianni barked. I stayed down for exactly 3 seconds before a second volley cracked overhead and Paolo yelled, I am too handsome to die in Brooklyn. Even under fire, I nearly laughed. Then I saw Dante. He had moved into the open to drag one of his men behind cover. Calm, efficient, terrifying, no wasted motion, no shouting. He fired twice, changed magazines, turned his body so the widest part of him faced the bullets and the narrowest part of me. I understood then why people feared him in a way that stories never conveyed. Dante was not dramatic in violence. He was precise. It was worse. A shooter broke from the loading dock shadows and came toward our barricade. I think I screamed Dante's name. I am not sure. Everything blurred into impact after that. Dante reached us first. The man went down. I did not see where Dante's knife entered him. Only the aftermath, the terrible softness of a body folding. Dante's face when he turned back to me, not enraged, not wild, but emptied down to one brutal purpose. Are you hit? He demanded. I don't know. He searched me with his eyes as if sight alone could make certainty. His hand hovered at my ribs, my shoulder, my throat, not touching, checking. Serafina. I'm okay, I said, though I was shaking so hard the words broke. A bullet shattered the concrete inches from us. Dante pulled me flat against him and took the next burst on the armored edge of the barrier instead of letting it strike where I had been. The breath left me. He bent over me fully then, body shielding mine. Rain flecked his lashes. There was blood on his collar that was not all his. "Listen to me," he said, voice low enough that the gunfire seemed far away. "When Gianni opens the rear car, you run. Paolo goes with you. You do not look back." "No," his eyes burned. "Do not do this now. I'm not leaving you here. You are if I say so." I stared at him. There had been orders before, many, but never this naked edge under them, not command, fear. Gianni shouted, "Roots open!" Dante did not move. Neither did I. Something in his face gave, not weakened, broke open. "Please," he said. I had never heard that word from him. Not once in 7 years. Everything around us dimmed beside it. He lowered his forehead almost to mine, breath rough for the first time since I had known him. "Little saint, please." Gunfire snapped again. Men shouted. The world still required survival. But Dante, who would have bled out before begging any living person for anything, was begging me. "For what?" I whispered. His voice went raw. "Let me get you home, let me keep you, let me—" He stopped himself like the words had teeth. Fifth almost, the sharpest yet. Then Gianni grabbed the rear door and Paolo appeared, white-faced and swearing. We made it to the safe house in Westchester with one flat tire, one wounded guard. And Dante's hand around the back of my neck, the entire drive, as if his body no longer recognized a world where I was not within reach. The safe house smelled like cedar and old linen. Rain battered the windows. Upstairs, while Gianni coordinated a perimeter, and Paolo loudly offered his blood type to anyone, in case devotion is medically relevant. Dante sat on the edge of the guest bed while I cleaned a cut above his brow. My hands trembled less now, not from calm, from exhaustion. He watched me with that terrible focus of his. "You saw too much," he said. "I saw enough. That should frighten you. It does. Not enough." I dabbed at the cut. "You think I don't know that?" His hand closed around my wrist, not hard, just enough to stop the cloth. There it was again, deliberate touch, warm skin, no pretense. "You stepped toward me," he said quietly. I frowned. "What?" "Tonight, 7 years ago, every time." The room went still around the words. He released my wrist and looked away toward the rain-black window. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Not softer, more dangerous because it was honest. "Everyone in my life learned early to step back from blood, to admire it, fear it, use it. You were 18 and you wiped it off my face like I was a man first." My throat tightened. "That," he said, still looking away, "was the beginning of the end for me." Something inside me tipped. I sat beside him because standing had become impossible. We did not touch immediately. The space between us felt alive. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. He turned back slowly. "Neither do I when it comes to you." I laughed once, and to my humiliation my eyes filled. "Don't," he said roughly. "I'm not crying because I'm sad. That's not better." Chapter 7, the platform when Dante kissed me. It was nothing like I had feared, and everything I had spent 7 years refusing to name. There was no hunger in it at first. No triumph. Just a terrible, careful tenderness that made my chest ache harder than desire ever could have. His hand came up to my face as if he still did not entirely trust himself with the right to touch me. Thumb warm under my jaw, breath rough against my mouth. I made the mistake of opening my eyes halfway through it. He was looking at me like grief. Then the radio on the nightstand crackled alive. Dante pulled back instantly. The loss of him was so sharp it felt physical. He swore once under his breath and reached for the handset. "Talk!" Gianni's voice came through strained but steady. "Safe house on Mott compromised. 2 down on their side, 1 on ours. Matteo moved cash out of Pier 12 and someone hit the West convoy. We've got a war now, boss." Dante stood in one smooth motion. The softness was gone so fast it might have been something I had imagined. Only the imprint of his mouth remained to argue otherwise. He turned to me as he buttoned his coat. "Lock this room after me." I sat on the edge of the bed, dizzy with too many kinds of fear. "No!" His eyes met mine. "Serafina, you do not get to kiss me like that and walk back into gunfire as if I was a prayer you borrowed." Something flashed across his face. Pain, maybe. Want, definitely. Then he sealed it away. I get to do exactly that if it keeps you breathing. He left before I could answer. By morning, Gianni was in surgery, and the safe house smelled like coffee, antiseptic, and panic politely dressed as efficiency. Paolo paced the kitchen with his phone in one hand and a protein bar in the other, glaring at both. I would like history to note, he muttered, that I have survived 3 shootings, 4 stakeouts, and Myrla's cooking when she is angry. Only to be defeated by artificial peanut butter. Paolo, I said, because his voice was the only thing keeping the room human. He looked up and his face softened. Gianni's alive. Relief nearly folded me in half. He took one through the shoulder and one along the ribs, Paolo said. Apparently even bullets cannot stand him for very long. I sat heavily at the table. My hands shook once and stopped. An hour later, Dante came back in with rain on his coat and exhaustion carved into the lines around his mouth. He carried a passport wallet and a train ticket. He set both in front of me. I stared at them. What is this? Your exit. The words did not make sense for a second. Montreal, he said. From there, Paris if you want it. There's an apartment under another name, enough cash for 3 years, and a kitchen job already arranged. I looked up sharply. You arranged a job? 2 years ago. The room blurred at the edges. 2 years ago, I repeated. I always had a route ready. My throat hurt. For me to leave you. For you to survive me. There it was. The deepest truth in the room, said with the same quiet voice he used to give orders about shipments and funerals. Paolo stopped pacing. Even he knew enough not to interrupt. I touched the passport wallet but did not open it. And you, Dante's expression did not change. I finished this. He had already decided what finish meant. I could hear it in the flatness of his tone. Matteo would not survive the week. Dante might not either. You're sending me away because Gianni got hurt. I'm sending you away because next time he might die. His words landed exactly where he meant them to. For 1 week, ugly moment, I wanted to take the ticket. I wanted butter and sugar and French mornings, and a life where the loudest sound at night was a delivery truck instead of a safety clicked off in the dark. Then Dante reached into his pocket. The silver lighter caught the kitchen light before he set it beside the ticket with a soft metallic click. Take Paolo, he said. Go now, before Matteo understands. I would burn the city to ash before I let him touch you again. Little saint, he did not say. Maybe because if he had, I would have broken. I went upstairs and packed in 15 minutes. 1 suitcase, my father's recipe notebook, my grandmother's handkerchief now washed clean. The green dress from the anniversary dinner, though I did not know why. At the bottom of the drawer lay the acceptance letter from Le Cordon Bleu. I had never answered after my father died, and Dante married me before the week was out. Paris. The life I had once thought grief had stolen. At the safe house clinic, Gianni was awake when I went to say goodbye. Pale, bandaged, furious at being horizontal. You're leaving, he said. So I'm told. He studied my face for a long second. Do what lets you sleep. That seems impossible either way. Yeah, a faint smile. Welcome to us. At the station, Paolo carried my case and sulked at the departure board like it had personally offended him. If you go to Paris, he said, promise me one thing. What? You will send recipes, not because I am emotionally attached, for intelligence purposes. I laughed wetly. He stopped in front of the platform and took off his sunglasses. His eyes were red. Signora, he said quietly. He meant it. The job, the apartment, all of it. He's been building doors for you for years. A train screamed somewhere down the line. I looked at the ticket, at the passport, at the life Dante had prepared for me with the same care he had used to avoid touching me. And suddenly, I understood the shape of the choice in front of me. If I left, I could survive the world that made him. If I stayed, I would have to look directly at what it cost and choose it anyway. The train rolled in with a rush of steel and wind. I did not move. Paolo did not speak. When the conductor called final boarding, I tore the ticket cleanly in half. Then I opened the passport wallet, took out the false identity Dante had built for my escape, and dropped it into the station trash. "That was expensive," Paolo whispered. "Yes," I said and handed him my suitcase. "Take me back. To the safe house." I looked at the torn pieces in my hand. "No. To the war." When Dante saw me walk back into his world an hour later, wet-haired and empty-handed, something hard and helpless crossed his face. "I told you to go. I know. And—" I stepped close enough to smell rain and gun oil and the night that lived inside his coat. "I'm not staying because I can't leave. I'm staying because my father died over those ledgers, Gianni bled for me, and Matteo thinks he can use everything dead people loved to make you kneel." Dante went very still. "For the first time," I said, "I am choosing this with open eyes." His hand closed around the lighter on the table until his knuckles whitened. Then he said, so quietly it felt like a vow made underwater, "God help anyone who makes you regret it." I did not leave. Chapter 8. The cellar door. Once I chose to stay, the house changed around me. No one treated me like porcelain after that. Not Dante, not Gianni when he was moved back to the villa with stitches and a temper. Not Lucia when she placed 3 archived account books beside my tea and said, "If you are going to be difficult, at least be useful." So I became useful. My father's ciphers were built on kitchen logic. Inventory disguised as scripture, transfers hidden inside feast day codes, initials buried in ingredient ratios. Flour meant cash. Olive oil meant arms. Almond extract meant offshore movement. I spent 2 days at the library table with ledgers spread under brass lamps, pencils smudged across my fingers, while the storm of Dante's war gathered outside the windows. Matteo had taken money from St. Bartholomew's for years. Not only taken, redirected. Through shell charities, construction firms, 2 funeral homes, and a shipping company with 12 employees who did not exist. The missing fund had financed half the quiet empire Dante now bled to defend. When I found the final pattern, my stomach turned cold. "It isn't only theft," I said. Dante stood across the table, hands braced on either side of the ledger. "What is it?" "He built an exit route." I pointed to the repeated marks. "These aren't random ports. They're children's, initials cross-referenced to travel documents. He's been moving boys out of the orphanage records before they age out." "Selling them?" Gianni asked from the doorway, voice like stone. I swallowed. "Or recruiting them?" The room went silent. Dante looked at the page for a long moment, then at me. Something darkened behind his eyes in a way that made even Gianni look away. Lucia entered with fresh tea and stopped when she felt the shift in the air. The tray trembled once in her hands before she set it down. That tiny tremor was enough. Dante noticed it too. He straightened slowly. "Who have you spoken to?" Lucia went very still. "About what?" "Don't insult me." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Lucia sat down with a precision that frightened me more than panic would have. "He has my son," she said. The words landed like a dropped glass. I stared at her. Lucia had no children. That was what she had always said. That was the accepted truth. Lucia looked only at Dante. "Not by birth, by blood and foolishness, yes. Nico, you remember him from Jersey." Dante's jaw tightened. "I remember a boy who liked fast cars and bad lies. He owed money. Matteo paid it, then turned the debt into a chain." Her mouth shook once and steadied. "He made me tell him when she moved rooms." "Nothing more," he said. "Nothing violent, just schedules, doors, staff changes." My breath caught. Lucia finally looked at me and I saw real shame there. Not excuse, not self-pity. Worse. "I never meant for them to shoot at you," she whispered. "Pain has strange manners. Mine arrived cold and very polite." "You brought him to my door," I said. "Yes." The word broke on the way out. Dante did not raise his voice. He was far beyond that. "Where is Nico now?" "In Matteo's wine cellar on Riverside." "He sent a key this morning." Lucia reached into her apron pocket with shaking fingers and put an old brass key on the ledger. "He said if I told you, my son dies by dusk." If I stayed silent, he would keep using me until there was nothing left of this house but ash. Gianni cursed softly. I stared at the key. You were going to keep quiet, I said. Lucia's face folded with grief so old it must have lived in her bones. I was going to choose my child. The answer hurt because it was human. Dante picked up the key. Riverside is a trap. Yes, Lucia said. For you, he turned to Gianni. Take a team. No, I said. Both men looked at me. I pointed to the tea tray Lucia had brought in, one cup already poured. Mine, don't drink that. Lucia's head snapped toward it. I leaned down and smelled it. Chamomile, honey, and beneath that, faint but unmistakable, the medicinal sweetness of chloral hydrate. Not enough to kill, enough to soften reflexes, enough to make capture easier. I didn't put that there, Lucia said hoarsely. I believed her. Which meant someone had entered the room while we were bent over ledgers and nobody had seen it. Dante moved first. Too late. The library doors opened, and 3 armed men came in through the side corridor we had thought was sealed. Chaos followed. Gianni fired before the first shout finished leaving his mouth. Lucia shoved the tea tray at the nearest gunman with a violence that seemed to surprise even her. Porcelain shattered. I ducked behind the table. Dante got to me, but not fast enough. A cloth slammed over my mouth from behind. Sweet chemical fumes flooded my head. I bit the hand hard. Someone cursed. I drove my elbow back and tasted blood in my own mouth where I had bitten my tongue. Serafina! Dante's voice sounded farther away than it should have. I fought. God, I fought. Fingernails, heels, teeth, all the graceless parts of survival. But the drug had already touched the edges of my vision. The last thing I saw before the corridor split into darkness was Dante reaching for me over the overturned table, while Lucia screamed his name like a prayer she no longer deserved to say. When I woke, I was in a cellar lined with old stone and newer locks. One bare bulb, one wooden chair. One table set with a silver tray, tea service, and almond cakes that looked almost delicate enough to be kind. Matteo Vitelli sat opposite me in a charcoal suit, smiling with genuine regret. You always did make this difficult, he said. I tested the rope at my wrists and tasted the stale sweetness of drugged cloth at the back of my throat. Lucia told him, I said. Eventually, Matteo sighed. Maternal love, so predictable. Hatred clarified everything. He poured tea into thin porcelain cups. Drink with me, Sira. I lifted my chin. I'd rather choke. His smile widened. There you are. I leaned forward just enough to smell the cup he slid toward me. Not tea, sedative, heavier than before, clumsy beneath the bergamot. He still thought I was ornamental. Good. Matteo rested his elbows on the table. Do you know what Dante never understood? He thinks restraint makes him noble. It doesn't. It only makes him late. The cellar door locked behind him with a dull, final sound. Too late, the room said. Chapter 9. The sugar knife. Matteo left the tea where I could reach it, and the knife where I could see it. That told me everything about the kind of man he was. The knife was not for me to use. It was there so I would notice it, imagine it, fail to get it, and understand exactly how much control he believed he had. Men like Matteo wanted witnesses inside their cruelty. Even if the only witness was the person they meant to break. I lowered my eyes, let my breathing stay slow, and listened to the room. One guard outside the cellar door, heavy shoes. Bad knee on the left side from the uneven rhythm. Water in the pipes somewhere behind the wall. A draft near the floor from an older service hatch. The almond cakes on the tray had a faint medicinal smell beneath the sugar glaze. He had drugged those too. Amateur. When the guard opened the door an hour later to check on me, I let my head loll to one side as if the first dose had finished what it started. Signora, he said. I did not answer. He came closer. That was his mistake. I kicked the tea tray at his shins with all the force my bound legs could manage. Porcelain exploded. He swore and bent instinctively. I lunged for the knife, caught the handle, and sawed the rope against the blade edge until one wrist came free. He grabbed my hair. I stabbed backward blind, not deep enough to kill. Deep enough to make him scream. I ran. The service hatch at the base of the wall opened into a narrow passage that smelled like damp earth and old coal. I scraped both palms raw on stone and crawled until the tunnel widened into what had once been a sugar storage room. Rusted hooks, broken shelving. An industrial copper boiler large enough to melt a man if you were immoral and motivated. Unfortunately for Mateo, I was both frightened and my father's daughter. Voices echoed down the passage. Searching, on a workbench lay sacks of raw sugar, a propane torch, and a tray of metal tasting spoons. I moved before I could think myself out of it. Sugar into a pan, torch underneath, fast heat. Stir, don't stop. Boiling syrup rose clear, then amber. Footsteps closer. My heart beat so hard it hurt. When the first man entered, I threw the molten sugar straight at his gun hand. He howled. The weapon clattered. I grabbed it, nearly dropped it, then fired once the way Gianni had taught me last winter in an empty field because, as he put it, loving this family without learning angles is a short career. The shot hit the wall. The sound alone was enough. He ducked. I ran again. By the time I burst through the outer door into the loading yard, night had fully fallen and rain was coming down in silver lines under the yard lights. 3 black SUVs were already there. Dante reached me first. He did not speak. He caught the back of my neck, pulled me into him so hard my teeth struck together, and held me like a man dragging himself back from the edge of something bottomless. I could feel the rain on his coat, the violence still in his body, the effort it cost him not to shake. "I'm here," I said, though I was not sure whether I meant for him or for me. His forehead pressed once to mine, just once. Then he turned and put me behind him in the same movement, gun raised toward the cellar entrance. Paolo came up at my side, soaked through and breathing hard. "For the record," he said, "this was a terrible evening for my macros." I made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been hysteria. Gianni emerged from the second SUV with one arm strapped tight against his chest and murder in his face. "You couldn't wait 3 more days?" he asked me. I was busy, clearly. Lucia was not with them. The absence struck me immediately. Dante heard the question before I asked it. "House arrest. Alive. For now." That for now was not only about Lucia. Mateo stepped out from the cellar doorway then, unarmed and immaculate despite the rain. He looked at Dante first, then at me in Dante's shadow, and smiled like a man arriving late to dinner. "There she is," he said. "I was beginning to think you taught her to stay put." Dante's voice went flat enough to freeze water. "You have 1 sentence." Mateo laughed softly. "Still pretending this is about honor." He tilted his head toward me. "Tell her about Bianca." The name struck Dante like a blade under the ribs. I felt it in the way his whole body went still. Mateo's eyes brightened with cruelty and something worse, old hurt. "Tell your wife about the little girl from St. Bartholomew's. Tell her whose inhaler you dropped when the dormitory burned. Tell her how Don Salvator said 1 weak child was a fair trade for the books you carried out." Rain roared between them. I looked at Dante. His jaw tightened once. Not denial, memory. Mateo spread his hands. "That was the night I learned what he would become. Efficient, loyal, clean with sacrifice." Something inside Dante seemed to shut behind his eyes. Then I understood. The wound he never named. Not a woman lost, not some vague old grief. A little foster sister with damaged lungs and dark braids, and a panic-stricken hand he had not gotten back to in time. A child traded for proof. A boy turned into the kind of man who would rather starve than take from the vulnerable again. Mateo saw the understanding land in me and smiled at Dante with naked triumph. "There, now she knows what you are." I stepped out from behind Dante before anyone could stop me. "What I know," I said, voice shaking and steady at once, "is that a boy failed to save a girl and spent the rest of his life refusing to become the men around him." Mateo blinked. I kept going. "What you became after that was a choice." For the first time since I had known him, Mateo lost the shape of his charm. Dante's hand caught my wrist, not to restrain, to anchor. He did not look at me. He said very quietly, "Little saint." Not cold now, not yet warm, something rower. Mateo's face hardened. "You always step toward the blood." "Yes," I said. "And you keep proving which kind of man deserves it." The men around us shifted. The final line had been crossed. As Dante moved his people back toward the cars, Mateo called after him through the rain, "St. Bartholomew's at dawn, you know why." Dante did know. So did I. One of them would not leave that place alive. Chapter 10. The bell tower St. Bartholomew's home looked smaller in the rain than it had in my imagination. The brick was older, the chapel steeple crooked by a fraction, the playground rusted into stillness behind locked iron gates. Dawn had barely broken. Mist sat low over the yard. Every window looked blind. "This is wrong," Gianni said quietly. We were in the second car down the hill, engines off, men waiting for Dante's signal. He sat beside me in the back seat, coat buttoned, gun holstered, silver lighter turning once between his fingers and then stilling. "This is exactly right," Dante said. "He wants me to remember every room." I looked at him. He had not slept. Neither had I. There was a cut at his temple from the cellar yard, and dried blood traced the edge of his collar. I wanted to reach for him. I did not. Not because I had stopped wanting to, because this moment required both our hands free. "What's the play?" Paolo asked from the front seat, trying for levity and only partly finding it. "Simple," Dante said. "You hate simple." "I do, yes. You and Gianni take the East dormitory. Empty it if Mateo's moved boys in there. Serafina stays with me." "No," I said immediately. Both men in the front went quiet. Dante turned his head. "No. If those records are here, I'm the fastest one at reading which names matter. And if Mateo moved kids through those shell routes, someone in this building won't know whether they're being rescued or stolen again." I held his gaze. "I can help." He was silent for one long beat. Then he nodded once. "You stay where I can see you." It was the closest thing to surrender he could offer. Inside, the orphanage smelled like old wax, mildew, and rain forced through cracked stone. My shoes knew before the rest of me did that children had once run these corridors. There was a different echo where little bodies had lived, a different emptiness after. We found the records room first, ledgers stacked to the ceiling, donation plaques, mold blooming under a cracked radiator. I moved fast, flipping through the coded books while Dante stood at the door like judgment given human form. "Here," I said after 3 minutes that felt like 30. "Transfer list." Basement chapel, not dormitory. He didn't bring the boys here to hide them. He brought them for leverage. A shot cracked from the east wing, then another. Gianni's voice roared over the radio. "Contact!" Dante was already moving. The basement chapel sat beneath the main sanctuary, accessible by a stone stair that narrowed enough to make ambush easy. Mateo had planned that too. Men fired from the landing. Dante's people answered. Paolo swore in inventive bursts. Plaster rained from the wall beside my head. I flattened behind a pillar and smelled smoke. Not gun smoke, lamp oil. "Dante," I shouted. "He's going to burn it." Mateo had chosen the place carefully. Old records, old wood, old ghosts. One match and the building would become the same wound twice. Dante looked at me once and understood. He shot the oil lamp off the landing shelf before Mateo's man could kick it down the stairs. Glass shattered. Flame leapt sideways instead of down. For 3 violent minutes, everything became motion. Gianni took the landing with brute refusal. Paolo dragged 2 terrified teenage boys from a side room while muttering, "If either of you becomes an accountant, I'll die insulted." Dante cleared the chapel entrance and found Mateo waiting by the altar rail like a blasphemy arranged for daylight. I saw them face each other across the ruined room. Brothers, if not by blood, then by every uglier thing. Mateo smiled, tired and bright. "You brought her." "I knew you would." Dante's voice was almost gentle. "You put children back in chains to settle a boyhood debt." Mateo laughed once. "Don't perform morality for me. Don Salvator made us both." I just stopped lying about it. He fired first. Dante moved first. The shots seemed to fold into each other. Matteo took one high in the shoulder and staggered. Dante took one along the side and barely reacted. Then they were too close for guns to matter. I should not remember the rest as clearly as I do. But I do. The sound of fists in close stone. Matteo's breath breaking. Dante's face when Matteo drove a blade toward his ribs and Dante caught his wrist with blood already running down his side. The awful, intimate efficiency with which a man ends the life that once knew all his names. When it was over, Matteo knelt by the altar rail, one hand pressed uselessly to his throat. He looked at me, not Dante. "Ask him," he rasped. "If he would have left then, if you'd mattered this much." Dante stood over him, chest rising hard once. "I would have burned the whole city," he said quietly, "and let every man in it call me monster." Matteo smiled with blood in his teeth. "There you are!" Then he died. For a second, no one moved. I saw what victory cost in that stillness. Not relief, not glory. Dante had just killed the last person alive who remembered Bianca's laugh, the last witness to the boy he used to be. Behind me, Lucia appeared in the chapel doorway with a gun in her hand and tears on her face. She had disobeyed her guard. She had come anyway. One of Matteo's dying men lifted a hidden pistol from the floor. Lucia saw it before any of us. She stepped between the shot and Dante without thinking. The bullet took her high in the chest. Everything broke at once after that. Paolo shouting for a medic. Gianni swearing with the raw fury of a son who had found a second mother too late. Dante catching Lucia as she slid down the altar step, blood bright against his black coat. Lucia looked at him once, then at me. "Open the east rooms," she whispered to me. For good, then she was gone. Hours later, after the fire was out, the boys were safe, and the dead were counted honestly. Dante stood beside me on the orphanage steps while rain washed diluted blood into the cracked stone. "It is over," he said, and this time it was. Chapter 11. The open door after war. The world does not become gentle, it becomes specific. The men who come back limp. The silences at dinner where one voice should be. The way grief sits differently in each room depending on who last stood there. Matteo was dead. The shell roots were burned. The surviving boys from St. Bartholomew's were moved into real protection under names no one outside the family would ever see. And Lucia was buried on a gray Thursday under cypress trees behind the family chapel. Paolo cried openly, then denied it was crying and blamed an aggressive wind. Meyerla held his hand through the service anyway. Gianni stood with one arm still stiff from his wound and stared at the grave like he was memorizing it for later arguments with God. Dante did not speak at the burial. He spoke that night. I found him in the east wing with the connecting door open between our rooms for the first time in 7 years. Not unlocked. Open. The sight of it stopped me on the threshold. Dante stood inside the doorway, jacket off, the silver lighter in one hand, my washed handkerchief in the other. He looked tired in the way men look after surviving the exact thing they believed they deserved. "I kept meaning to do that," he said, glancing at the door. 7 years is a long meaning. "Yes," I walked closer. The marble was cold under my bare feet. The house was quiet in a way it had not been since before the anniversary dinner, not because it was safe, exactly, but because the shouting was over. "She saved you," I said. He looked down at the handkerchief. "She saved what was left of my ability to be looked at by myself." I stopped in front of him. "That isn't nothing." "No," he exhaled once. "It also isn't enough." I knew what he meant. Lucia's betrayal had been love warped by fear. Her death had been redemption purchased late. In Dante's world, nothing arrived clean. He set the lighter on the console table. Click, soft, familiar. Then he lifted his gaze to mine. "I have something ugly to ask you." I waited. "The council wants a public renewal of vows." That startled a laugh out of me. "Ugly? They want certainty, optics, an heir eventually." His jaw shifted. "I told them they could go to hell." "Gianni says that is bad governance." "Probably. I'm not asking because of them." The room changed. Then why are you asking? He went quiet long enough to make my heartbeat climb. This was how it always happened with him. Not speeches, never speeches. Truth dragged out of him as if it cost tissue. Because the first time I married you, he said, I was making a wall. My throat tightened. And now, I asked. His eyes held mine without flinching. Now I am asking if you will build a life with me on purpose. The simplicity of it undid me more than anything ornate could have. I could have made him wait. Perhaps I should have. He deserved, at least a little, to stand in uncertainty after the years he kept me there. Instead I said, because it was the truest thing in reach, you terrify me. A shadow of humor touched his mouth. I know, and I still sleep better when I hear your lighter through the wall. That almost smile deepened by a fraction. I know that too. I stepped into the open doorway between our rooms and put my hand flat against his chest. His heartbeat landed warm and solid under my palm. I don't want a wall, I whispered. But I do want the man who built one for me before I even knew I needed it. Something in his face broke open and softened all at once. Little saint, he said. There it was at last, fully warm. No ownership sharpened into it, no cold observation, just love, bare and devastating. Yes, I said, and his eyes closed briefly as if the word had struck somewhere he had been holding shut by force. Our second wedding was 10 days later in the small garden chapel behind the villa, because neither of us could stand the theater of the family cathedral. Paolo wore a suit so tight Gianni asked if he had been painted into it. Myrla, in pale blue, finally accepted his flowers without criticizing the arrangement. Lucia's absence sat with us like a fourth witness at the altar. I wore ivory silk and no veil. When the priest asked Dante if he took me freely, a terrible little silence opened under the words. Dante answered in a voice low enough to feel intimate even in church. More freely than any choice I've made in my life. Paolo made a broken sound that might have been a sob and might have been him losing a private war with emotion and tailoring. Afterward, there was cake, good wine, and 1 hour in the villa kitchen where I found Paolo trying to steal sugared almonds into his pocket, while Myrla pretended not to notice. You're smiling, I told her. I'm preparing to regret everything, she replied. Paolo pressed a hand to his heart. Her tenderness overwhelms me. Later, when the guests were gone and the candles had burned low, Dante found me by the open door between our rooms. No one interrupted him this time. No radio cracked alive. No gunfire split the air. No history rushed in to remind us of who the world had made him and what it had almost made me. He touched my cheek like it was still a privilege. And for the first time since I had worn his name, nothing between us was locked. Chapter 12. The click in the dark 9 months later, the villa kitchen smelled like oranges, warm sugar, and complete chaos. I stood at the central marble counter, glazing a tower of small cakes, while Paolo argued with a deliveryman over the moral importance of proper ricotta. Myrla, now wearing his ring and none the softer for it, threatened to throw them both into the herb garden if they did not move their drama away from my sponge sugar. In the courtyard beyond the windows, children from St. Bartholomew's, newly rehoused, noisier, and gloriously unimpressed by family prestige, ran between the hedges with paper flags in their hands. The orphanage fund had been rebuilt under independent oversight, 3 lawyers, and Gianni's personal promise that anyone stealing from children again would lose the use of their thumbs. He had only been half joking. The East rooms were no longer East rooms. They were ours now, doors open, books mixed on the shelves, his black coats hanging beside my aprons. A life assembled not from innocence but from decision. I finished the glaze and stepped back to look at the cake, dark chocolate base, rose cream center. A caramel crown thin enough to crack with a spoon. The saint's glass, remade for the reopening fundraiser because some metaphors refuse to stop telling the truth just because you survive them. Paolo wandered over and stared reverently. If this is for the children, I would like to become a child immediately. You already behave like one. Myrla, passing behind him with silverware, said. That ship sailed years ago. he sighed with theatrical misery. Marriage has sharpened her. Impossible, Gianni said from the doorway, and for once he was smiling without effort. He still carried the stiffness in his side on cold mornings. Dante still carried Saint Bartholomew's in quieter ways. Some wounds did not vanish. They merely stopped being the only thing in the room. The front door opened somewhere down the hall. I knew it was Dante before anyone said his name. Not by footsteps, by the click. Soft, metallic, precise, his lighter. It sounded from the corridor once, and something in me that had learned his every weather settled immediately. Paolo looked toward the doorway. Ah! The landlord of all tension returns. Dante entered the kitchen with evening on his coat and a box tucked under one arm. He had been at the new Midtown Hotel site all day, negotiating permits and frightening contractors into honesty. There was a smear of blood at the corner of his mouth. My pulse stumbled exactly the way it had on the anniversary dinner 9 months ago. He saw me notice. Stopped. Around us, the room thinned with awareness. Gianni looked once at Dante's face and then very deliberately at the ceiling. Paolo muttered, "Here we go," to no one at all. I crossed the kitchen without hurrying. Dante waited. "What happened?" I asked. "A stubborn piece of scaffolding. That is not an explanation. It lost." I took my grandmother's handkerchief from my apron pocket, same white linen, same stitched S. I had started carrying it again without meaning to, maybe because some gestures become part of the architecture of a life. When I stopped in front of him, he bent his head before I asked. That was the difference. Not the blood, not the room full of witnesses, not even the fact that his hand came to rest lightly at my waist as if it had always belonged there. The difference was trust given freely. I pressed the linen to his mouth and wiped away the thin red line, warm skin, faint stubble, his cologne over cold air. The same notes as the first night and nothing like it at all. He watched my face while I did it. "You still do it," he said softly. The kitchen had gone quiet. "Yes," I said. Even now, especially now, I thought, after seeing the worst, after choosing it anyway. After learning that love did not make a man gentle, but could make him careful in places where brutality had once lived unquestioned. He took the handkerchief from my fingers and folded it once, the same way he had on our anniversary, but instead of slipping it into his pocket, he tucked it back into my apron. "Keep it, little saint." The name moved through me with all 12 lives it had lived. Cold possession, warning, prayer, hunger, relief. Home, Paolo sniffed loudly. "If anyone needs me, I'll be in the pantry having a respectful emotional collapse next to the cannoli shells." Myrla swatted his arm and failed to hide her smile. Gianni, mercifully, took the children outside to light the courtyard candles. Dante set the box he had carried onto the counter and opened it. Inside lay a silver plaque for the new kitchen at the Midtown Hotel. Bellini Studio, engraved in quiet script. I looked up too fast. "Dante, you said once I was taking the only part of your life that was yours." He touched the edge of the plaque. "I was. This one is yours because you built it, and because I would like the city to know whose hands made half the piece I now get credit for." My eyes filled before I had any plan for dignity. "That is unfair," I said. "Yes." His thumb brushed under one eye. "Cry anyway." So I did, because this was what innocence became if it lived long enough in the dark, not ignorance, not softness. The stubborn refusal to stop stepping toward what mattered just because blood had once been there. Outside, the children shouted as the first candles took. Inside, Dante picked up his lighter. Click. He lit the cake candles one by one, while the caramel crowns shone under the kitchen lamps. The room filled with gold. I watched his hands and thought of every time he had stopped himself before touching me, every time he had chosen my safety over his wanting, every door he had locked, and every door he had later opened with shaking, human hands. Love had not made him harmless, it had made him answerable. And sometimes, when the house went quiet and I heard that lighter in the dark, I still wondered whether loving him had saved the best part of him, or simply taught me how to live beside what it cost him to keep it. He glanced at me over the candlelight, saw too much as usual, and held out his hand. I took it. If you had stood where I stood, knowing what his love protected and what it destroyed, would you have chosen Dante too?